However, when you think about the way that we get information, that's also changing. You know, this actually used to be kind of funny. Now it's actually kind of true. This guy says, I already diagnosed myself on the internet. I'm just here for a second opinion. I'm good friends with a member of Congress named Michael Burgess. Many of you may know him from the Texas area. Physician, OBGYN, practiced for a couple of, I think, 20 years before going to Congress. He tells a great story. And if any of you know Burgess, he's the most unassuming guy, most likable guy you'll probably find on Capitol Hill. And he said, you know, I remember back in the day when I was practicing every day, and I felt like Alec Baldwin. And this is a guy who looks nothing like Alec Baldwin. But he said, I felt like Alec Baldwin in Malice. I'd walk in with my coat, my stethoscope, and I'd look at the patient and I'd tell them exactly what they needed to do. And they just nod their head, and then they promptly leave and not do it. He said, now, patients come in. He still sees patients occasionally. Now patients come in like this guy, stack of papers. Have you read about this clinical trial in Denmark? Have you seen this new drug that came out in China? Have you seen the clinical trials of X, Y, and Z? Have you seen this new model, you know? And he said, I actually learn so much more from my patients because they come in informed, knowledgeable, and educated. He said, what is the most amazing thing is that when you think about 10, 20 years from now, patients are going to come in and say, I'm predisposed for Alzheimer's disease. My mother had colorectal cancer. I'm predisposed for it. I'm genetically predisposed for Parkinson's, whatever the condition may be. They know that they have a 50% chance of getting Alzheimer's. And the question then will be, what can we do today to prevent Alzheimer's? Can't prevent it, but what are we going to do today to treat it? What are we going to do to head it off? What are we going to do to be proactive? So the whole future around genetics, I mean, that's just amazing. So when you see someone and you talk to any provider, it has really changed over the last 20 or 30 years, going from Alec Baldwin and Malice to, you know, science fiction when it comes to genetics. And a lot of that is already out on the market today. It's pretty amazing. So this is something that is really a nonpartisan issue. It's a no-brainer to move into the 21st century with health IT. How are we actually getting there? Hopefully we're moving from this. This is a picture that was taken in a physician group practice about a week after Hurricane Katrina. This is the file room that was flooded after Katrina. And if you see the black marks all over these files is mold. And I think Katrina is really emblematic. We've forgotten how disastrous and catastrophic that was. We actually talked with folks from MD Anderson who said that they received hundreds of patients coming from New Orleans who were in the middle of chemotherapy, who were in the middle of radiation, who had oncology surgery scheduled. No medical records whatsoever in many cases. So they were rebuilding on the fly, diagnosis labs, trying to reconfigure what this medical record looked like, what this patient was battling. And some of the physician leaders there said, we have absolutely no doubt that people died because they didn't have access to their information. Cost us millions of dollars trying to rebuild their records. And many people died because of it. And the way that we can get around it is actually building out a modernized, interoperable system of health information technology. An interesting survey from a couple years ago, Wall Street Journal asked, which of the following technologies would you like to have access to when seeking care from a doctor or hospital? Fair question. Electronic medical record to capture information, 2/3 said yes. Email directly with my doctor, 74%. Scheduling a doctor's visit online, 75%. Receiving diagnostic tests via email, 67%. Email reminder, 77%. All of us probably have a smartphone of some sort. When you think about the technological complexity of these things, this is pretty elementary, right? Scheduling visits online, I mean, you just look at Expedia that's been doing it for years. You can pick your seat. Seat Guru tells you how far back it reclines, if you have enough leg room. But yet, in healthcare, we can't even schedule a visit online for most patients. So when you ask the flip side of that question, to what extent do you use or have access to the following? This is obviously not a scientific study, but it does mirror more valid studies that show physicians and hospitals are way behind when it comes to the adoption of technology. Upwards of 90, 95% do not have the capacity to do even these elementary things. But thankfully, it's changing. I think one of the big things out of the stimulus law from a few years ago was the incentive payments that can go to physicians and hospitals to adopt and use, in a meaningful way, electronic health records. That was something that we were very much in support of. We worked with many members on both sides of the aisle to move that forward. There have been regulations over the past year and a half around meaningful use, which basically says that you can't just adopt it. You have to use it and hit certain benchmarks. Three broad definitions of meaningful use. It has to be certified. Can't be a fly-by-night company. Has to actually have gone through a fairly rigorous set of testing. The systems must have the capability to actually electronically exchange data, so it can't be siloed. Even though we would argue that a siloed electronic medical record is better than a paper silo. But the real promise is when you can actually shift that information around. And lastly, it must have the ability to report quality indicators to HHS, states, or other payers. A couple of takeaways. I'm running out of time, so I'll quickly go through these. The need for IT is only going to grow. You look at that picture of Katrina and the moldy records, that's only one aspect of it. You look at the reform law. The only way that physicians can survive the reform law, I believe, is to adopt and use electronic medical records and other health information technology. You simply can't survive with everything that's coming down the pike, doing it the same old way, administering it on paper. Payers, same way. You look at what's coming down the pike with all of the changes on insurance and underwriting, medical loss ratio. You got to have much more efficiency. Partnering with providers around health information technology benefits both sides. And for patients, having information with which to base informed decisions, I think, is really the key to for patients to find quality care and ultimately at lower costs. The market and the technology, I think, is really up for grabs. There's a big tension right now between kind of big box EMR companies and more cloud-based computing. The market trend is moving toward more cloud-based stuff. You know, there are even players like GE. They've had a long history and a very successful history in, you know, installing big systems. They have something called Centricity Advanced, which is basically a cloud EMR. Very inexpensive. I think it's less than $200 per month per physician to have a very robust clinical EMR system. So how that plays out, you might have a hybrid at the end, but how that plays out is still anyone's guess. Coordinated care, you can't have coordinated care without interoperability. Having the connected pieces of plans, providers, home health, hospitals, pharmacies, rehab, you name it. There is going to be no coordination unless you have interoperability. I heard a funny saying about patient-centered medical home. As of right now, there's lots of medical, there's not much home. And there's not much home because there isn't that level of coordination. There isn't that level of technology. The incentives are here. We've seen those. What typically happens is they go from incentives to mandates. So at some point in the future, you could see the federal government actually requiring the use of electronic medical records and other IT to actually participate in Medicare. Probably not in Medicaid, but perhaps in Medicare. And the last takeaway is let's hope all this works. I mean, you think about, and Scott and I have talked many times about ICD-10, about 5010. I mean, that's now a second-tier issue that is obviously very, very significant issue. But when you think about the onslaught of things that are coming, between the incentive payments for HIT, health reform, quality indicators, just the cost pressure alone is really enormous. So let's hope that this works. And with leaders like you still out there fighting the good fight and in the trenches and really innovating, like the folks on that last panel, I think we do have a fighting chance to turn this thing around. So with that, time for a few questions?
We've got 5 minutes for questions, so thank you. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.